All right, viewers, for today we're dealing with the subtopic in theory of demand, which is known as price elasticity of demand. Now, price elasticity of demand is one of the subunits of the topic elasticity of demand. Elasticity of demand is a topic on its own, which has three different angles. One of them is price elasticity of demand, the second one is income elasticity of demand, the third one is cross elasticity of demand. Now we have actually taken the introductory aspect, so we are doing an extension considering one of the aspects, which is price elasticity of demand. Now price elasticity of demand can be defined as the degree of responsiveness of changes in quantity demanded to the changes in price. In other words, we're looking at the reaction of quantity demanded to the action of price. Now, it can be calculated with the formula percentage change in quantity demanded over percentage change in price. Take notes. This can be defined as the degree of responsiveness of quantity demanded to changes in the price of the commodity. Well, no need to stress students about this because this is something that they can get or find, and we're trying to throw more light on the complicated part of this elasticity, which is the diagram representation. So when we have percentage change in quantity demanded over percentage change in price, this is the formula for conventional calculation. But this formula can be broken down into a shortcut, which we cannot establish if we do not know the sub-formulas for each of these components in the original formula. Percentage change in quantity, which is this, can also be gotten from the knowledge of change in quantity over first quantity times 100, while percentage change in price can also go with change in price over first price times 100. If you substitute this here and substitute this here, you're going to have then price elasticity of demand. Please, that's what this notation means, PED. Price elasticity of demand will now be equal to, I'll have change in quantity over first quantity times 100 all over change in price over first price times 100. This is division. If 100 takes out 100, we will eventually have a situation where change in quantity, or better still, PED, price elasticity of demand, will now be equal to change in quantity over first quantity times. We'll turn this division to multiplication. We'll take the inverse of the denominator. So we'll have first price over change in price. If you switch this to your price elasticity of demand, will now become change in quantity over change in price times first price over first quantity. So whenever you want to calculate questions, especially in objective, you should learn to use this. Note, change in quantity is equal to Q2 minus Q1. So we're saying old quantity and new quantity difference, while change in price is equal to P2 minus P1. Just the difference between the prices and the difference between the what? Quantity. So if I have a question, for example, that says, so e.g., calculate the elasticity of demand, calculate the price, elasticity of demand from the table below. So let's consider a table that has price of the commodity in Naira, and then you have quantity in units, please. So the first price, first quantity, you have price 200, and then increasing to maybe 250. If you follow the law of demand, as price increases, quantity demanded will reduce. So let's assume we have 2,800. If this has to reduce, maybe it will come down to 2,200. If I have to calculate the elasticity of demand using this shortcut, all we need to do is check the difference between this and this, difference between this and this, and then we have values that can go into this. We can use both the conventional method and also use the shortcut. So let's start with the shortcut method. I have to recall that my change in quantity from what I can see on the board is the difference between this and this. 2,800, 2,200 will give us 600. Change in price, the difference between the two of them is 50. Don't forget, we also need the value of the first quantity. First quantity here is 2,800. And then we have first price, which is 200. Now, if that's what we're working with in terms of value, we can now say then price elasticity of demand, PED, will be equal to, we're dealing with change in quantity over change in price times first price over first quantity. If I introduce my change in quantity, that's going to give me 600 over, what's my change in price? It's 50, and that's against my first price, which is 200, against my first quantity, which is 280. This is going to be a bit complicated, but we'll move on. So you have 50 here, 50 in 100 gives you 2, and then in 200 it gives you 4. We have 2 zeros that can disappear. 6 in 28, not perfect, but we can have 4 in 28. So for clarity, let's reproduce the values and then have 1 against 28 on the lower part. So 4 here, 1, 4 here will give you 7. So if this is 7, eventually we'll have 6 over 7. 6 over 7, so 7 in 6 will give us 0, and then we have 0 up there at 60. 7 in 60 is roughly 0.8 thereabout is the final answer, maybe 0.85 or 0.84. Approximation will still give you 0.85 thereabout. So let's have it that way. And if you have to interpret, please, this is relatively inelastic or fairly inelastic. But we'll get to understand that when we put up the diagram. So using the conventional method, we can bring back these values into what we have here. And I don't think that's going to be a problem because we'll just bring in change in quantity here, the first quantity here, bring in change in price here, the first price here, the 100 still remain. So it's not a big difference. Just take the values, replace them here, and then solve differently and still bring the final answers you get here. And then take them back into this formula, place them above and below, and then it still give you 1.85. So that That's it for the calculation aspect. Now, when we get into the representation of price elasticity of demand with diagram and figures, we'll call it coefficients. One of the things that I need us to know is most examiners know that students know how to calculate elasticity of demand or price elasticity of demand. So they tend to give students more problem with the analysis. What's this analysis? There are 5 cases of 5 types of price elasticity of demand. The first one is, so let's consider it as types of price elasticity. Elasticity of demand. Now this is where I need the students to follow me closely. If you have missed anything before now, don't miss this part, because diagram is something you cannot learn on your own. Somebody has to explain to you. So let's have this knowledge go as important as possible. So this is types of price elasticity of demand. I'm going to state them and then present a diagram for each of them. The first one that we're going to consider is perfectly inelastic demand. So perfectly inelastic, take note, perfectly inelastic. So we might not have too many space to write because I'm more interested in the diagram. So we say perfectly inelastic. Demand is said to be perfectly inelastic when a change in price leads to no change in quantity demanded. I'll take that again. Demand is said to be perfectly inelastic when a change in price leads to a change or leads to no change in quantity demanded. It means that price changes and then quantity demanded doesn't change. The consumers don't respond to the change. It's an advantage to the one who is selling, to the producer, because you can increase price to any length and not lose any consumer. The commodity in this case has extreme importance. It's an essential commodity, totally. You can't do without it. That's what it means. So the diagram that is represented here is in this form. This diagram, straight off, your demand, your price, your price, your price. So you can see quantity, and then you have first price, second price, third price. Now what does this mean? It means that no matter how we fluctuate price, quantity will not move. So even if price is increased to the highest amount, the consumers will still remain. Elasticity of demand in this case, price elasticity of demand in this case is equal to 0. And that gives us the first case. So when you do your calculation of price elasticity of demand and you get 0, representing it under types of price elasticity of demand, your diagram is this, and your interpretation is what? Perfectly inelastic, in case the examiner wants you to interpret. Now the second one is inelastic. Now inelastic is also known as relatively. Now there are textbooks, relatively or fairly inelastic. Please. So you have a question where the examiner says inelastic. The examiner also means relatively inelastic or what? Fairly inelastic. Now demand is said to be inelastic or relatively inelastic or fairly inelastic when a change in price leads to a smaller change in quantity demanded. What does that mean? Price changes. the reaction of the consumers will not be much. It will be less. And we have taken questions where the examiner tries to confuse us with this nature of price elasticity of demand. Take note, the producer still has strength here. The producer who wants to make profit in this case will increase price, not decrease. Please take note, because this commodity is still a commodity that they cannot easily do without. This one, they cannot do without it. They can do without this, but not easily. So some of the consumers, not much, a few will stop buying, but a lot of the consumers will still remain to buy. So it gives that producer an edge. And the diagram representing this is in this form. Please take notes. It's just a slight adjustment in the demand curve. So this is our D, and I will have price. So this is my P1, this is my Q1. A change in price, you can see the difference. There is a large change in price, but a small change in quantity demanded. So if I have my P2 here, check out the gap and check out the gap. So that interprets the definition and then closes it on a perfect note. So Q1, Q2, P1, P2 represents inelastic price elasticity of demand. And in this case, we say elasticity of demand is said to be greater than 0, but less than 1. So price elasticity of demand, this is the way we represent it. We say 0 less than or equal to price elasticity of demand less than or equal to 1. So it is between 1 and 0. So when you calculate to get answers like 0.2, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 4, 5, 0.9, is still within this category. So the third one we're going to have is unitary. Types of price elasticity of demand, number 3 is unitary elastic. And demand is said to be unitary elastic when a change in price leads to a proportionate change in quantity demanded. It means that the rate of change in price is the same rate that quantity is going to respond. So it's unitary, it's the same, it's equal. And this is the diagram representing that. The diagram representing this is the regular diagram for demand curve, which is like this. So if it's like this and this is a demand, take notes. At this price, this is the quantity we're going to have. So there is a second price, and then we have quantity to be this. So P2, check the difference, still the same. So in this case, we have price elasticity of demand is equal to 1. So when you do your calculation and you get 1, the diagram representing that is this, and the interpretation will be unitary elastic. The fourth one that we have here is relatively elastic. So we move gradually. We'll call it elastic or relatively or fairly elastic. So in this aspect, we can just go straight to remind ourselves that the diagram is the opposite of what we have under relatively inelastic. So we just go straight with something like this And then we have an adjustment from unitary, which gives us this. And if this is what we have, this is what is going to happen. We have this price, this quantity, P1, Q1. When the price changes, the gap between these two is much on the quantity aspect. Please check the gap. And then don't forget, elasticity in this case is greater than 1 but less than infinity. So we can just have 1 less than equal to price elasticity of demand less than or equal to infinity. So once you calculate and you find your answer between greater than 1 but not up to infinity, this is the diagram representing it, and this is the interpretation. Now from this point, we can move to the last one, which is 5. Price elasticity of demand. The last one is perfectly elastic. So for perfectly elastic, we have the opposite of perfectly inelastic, and this is what the diagram looks like. Remember, I said our main concern doing this video is to help students understand the diagram, because a lot do not. So this is perfectly elastic, and then you have your price axis. So with a single price, quantity can navigate. So Q1, Q2, Q3. In this case, the supplier doesn't have, or the producer doesn't have an advantage, because increasing price here is going to make almost all the consumers run away. So for this, the producer cannot even touch price. Don't forget, for this, the producer should reduce price a little. For this, don't touch price, don't reduce it, don't increase it. For this one, reduce price. This one, don't increase. It means you can reduce to the lowest amount. So for this, reduce price to the lowest amount. For this, reduce price a little. Which means, in this case, price elasticity of demand is equal to infinity. The consumers can run in all. All of them can go if you increase price. So the best thing to do is reduce price to, the barest minimum. Having taken 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these price elasticity of demand and their diagrams, we can actually call it a day here, and then we'll hope to continue from where we stopped in our next video. So watch out for the video on income elasticity of demand, cross elasticity of demand, and the other part of the theory of demand.